The internet is living on borrowed time, and it is about to run out. Now, in many ways, it has ever been thus. The early internet was genuinely and amazingly free. You could find just about any content you so desired on the internet with virtually no safeguards and no safety rails, for better or for worse. Over the years, that liberty has been slowly chipped away at by video sharing platforms, by social media platforms, by countless government institutions implementing restrictions and regulations on the internet. All, of course, in the noble pursuit of keeping us safe. Or so at least is the claim. A claim that we can see right through, of course, as the internet has not been made any safer for us. The explosive rise in online scam attempts should be more than enough to indicate that. Despite all of the restrictions placed upon the internet, despite all the rules and regulations that we must now abide by, despite the fact that the internet is demonstrably and obviously, self-evidently far less free today than it was 10, 20 years ago, our safety has not increased at all. In fact, if anything, it seems to have sunk and decreased dramatically. So, let us immediately cast aside this idiotic notion that any of this is done for our safety. The point of all of this is control. It has never been for any other purpose, and it will never be for any other purpose. And one of the final pushes towards seizing complete control over the internet has just begun now, with a recently released green paper originating from the United Kingdom's government. This green paper is a remarkable mask-off moment, as it explains quite clearly that the purpose of the government's intervention is to take control over these sites to push their own propaganda, to allow government platforms advantages to increase social cohesion, to increase trust in institutions, to make sure that nobody questions the government any further. We'll get into the precise details of that in a minute or two, but for now, I'd like to lay a little bit more of the groundwork. As, first and foremost, one might be tempted to think that, oh, well, it's the United Kingdom. Who even cares anymore what happens on that obvious prison island? As the UK is racing headlong towards what one would hope would be the unenviable title of most tyrannical government in the West. And its attack on the internet, an attempt to seize control over social media, has of course been a long time coming, originating from an Ofcom report back in 2025. Ofcom is, of course, the Office of Communications, which is the government-approved regulatory authority in the UK for broadcasting, internet, television, etc., etc. It is the government's organ to make sure that the government's will is enforced upon the media apparatus of the nation. And this report, which was ordered by the government, obviously concluded that the government needs more control over social media. The Ofcom report states it very plainly that it is imperative that YouTube be made to artificially boost the presence of government media on YouTube, because otherwise it will simply not be able to compete with people in their basements. And worst of all, if children are not actively raised on public service broadcasters, on government-approved programming, they will risk turning away from the propaganda as they grow older. The risk of breaking the programming is too great for the government to accept. And, hey, I can see the counter-argument immediately as well, that this is a United Kingdom problem. Well, I wish it was, but unfortunately one tyrannical idea spreads very quickly across the European Union. As we can see, for example, in the banning children to access social media movement in Europe, where, to begin with, the United Kingdom wanted to ban children under the age of 16 to access social media. An intent I can sympathize with, but of course the intent is not an honest one, as the only way to make sure that children cannot access social media is through a general government ID system, where everybody has to identify themselves and their age whenever they log on to the internet, meaning that the government can now track your online activities. And with England sitting pretty at the top of the highest number of arrests made for online hate crimes in the world, the result of such a identification system are plain for all to see. And immediately thereafter, the European Union is rushing to create its own version of this, not willing to be outcompeted when it comes to tyranny by the United Kingdom. And lest the Americans think they might be safe for this, the groundwork has already been laid in your own nation. The politicians are chomping at the bits for this because it will allow them to return to the glory days of having full and absolute control over media. And make no mistake, the government never intended for the internet to be free, they simply didn't care about it. The government is made up of old people, of boomers. They didn't recognize the value of the internet. They didn't see its worth until it was already blatantly self-evident. They simply assumed that their control over traditional media would allow them to continue to influence the mind of the populace and crucially young people forever. But now that the internet has outcompeted public broadcasting media, they are moving as swiftly as they can in order to rectify their mistake. And you can tell that they are in a hurry to do so, because the Green Paper issued by the UK government is one of the most blatant mask-off moments I've ever seen. They're not even trying to hide behind the usual excuses that this is for your protection, or for the protection of children, or anybody else. They are simply outright stating that this is to continue the dominance of public service broadcasting, to indoctrinate children, and to ensure that their message and the trust in their institutions are held sacrosanct above anything else. Now, a Green Paper is, well, technically speaking, it is the government presenting the UK public with their intent and the reasoning behind that intent in order to gather the public's opinion on it. The government has no interest in actually taking any of that opinion on board, of course. It is utterly irrelevant. This is simply just opposition research to see how big the backlash will be to this newest tyrannical idea, and therefore, in turn, how long it's going to take to implement, and how careful they're going to have to be in implementing it. And you might even say that censorship is nothing new in and of itself, and by God, I sympathize with that idea. As somebody who can quite clearly prove that his own channel has been shadow banned for many years, and who knows tons of people who were equally shadow banned, and even worse on many an occasion, that YouTube has already been having its thumb on the weighing scale for quite some time. The motivations for that has changed over the years, whether it be political, ideological, or simply because they really dislike certain people, or for being in the wrong spot at the wrong time. So it certainly is rather funny to see that very same YouTube now warning that your content could be downranked, that you might suffer reduced exposure, and it might affect your reach and your channel growth if these things are implemented. Listen, YouTube, The only reason why this can even happen in the first place is because you created the tools to do this already. The United Kingdom's government is, in essence, only asking to be given access to the levers that YouTube is already pulling. But the existence of one tyrant is no reason to excuse another tyrant. And YouTube at least can be somewhat trusted to act in its own interest as a corporation. As we have seen over the last few years, we had a massive growth of the far left on YouTube, enormously so, far above and beyond anything that could reasonably be expected, particularly considering some of the drama that they had been involved in. Drama that would have gotten anyone else cashiered within moments. The very fact that Hassan Piker has a YouTube channel is ample proof that the rules are not applied evenly. And we have, of course, also seen YouTube remove content that questions the integrity of elections, or remove content that goes against public narratives on things like health, safety, etc., etc. YouTube already is not a platform, but a publisher, despite claiming all the protections of a publisher. No doubt whatsoever, YouTube requires massive fundamental reform and changes if it is ever to return to being a free platform. But, again, unfortunately, this is the devil we know, and in all due likelihood, an infinitely smaller one than a Labour UK government. As at least, YouTube is driven in part by market forces, whereas the entire point and purpose behind the current motions and manoeuvres of the UK government is to act in opposition to market currents. Let's now look at the Green Paper itself. It begins by explaining that 74% of all video time for an audience aged 16 to 24 and 69% for the 25 to 30s is now being spent on video sharing platforms and streaming services. This means that the overwhelming majority of people are simply not watching television anymore. And it's not just the adults, the children too are majoritively watching online videos. And, worst of all, more than half of UK adults now include social media as one of the ways they get their news. All of this is a bad thing because, as they also point out here, people who watch news on public service media providers are more likely to be politically active. So they are more thoroughly indoctrinated and more likely to go out and act in accordance with the government's wishes. They are more well-informed, again, more indoctrinated, and trusting of institutions. It's quite bold to just come out and say it straight up like that. The government wants its populace to be politically active in its favor, because it trusts its institutions, and it considers that to be well informed. This tells us a lot about how they view media. It is about having the correct opinions, the correct narrative, and encourage action specifically. Gone are the days of, oh, we seek unity, and welcome in are the days of we wish defenders to come back to us again because we are obviously under attack. And that is also the reason why it is being outcompeted. The BBC is but one of the British broadcasting corporations, and it is huge. It has an operating income of £200 million, with a net of £230 million, with near £2 billion in total assets and nearly 22,000 employees. And yet, this gargantuan organization cannot survive in the marketplace of ideas. It cannot survive in the open market. It requires artificial help to survive. The only conceivable reason why that could possibly be true is if it simply chooses not to compete, if it chooses instead to try and enforce its hegemony via government fiat rather than via the quality of its programming. And the only reason why it would do that is because of the political and ideological nature of that programming. They've already stated quite clearly that the point and purpose of the public service media is to increase trust in institutions, to encourage political activity in their benefit. And people don't want that. They're not interested. All the arguments of the state have long since failed. They have no convincing points left to communicate to the general public. And that's even for the public that gives a crap about any of that. The overwhelming majority are still normies who'd prefer to never have to think about politics in their life, and are desperately attempting to seek any refuge from the scourge of modernity that is politics, politics, politics. But unfortunately, we're just not done with politics yet, not for quite a while longer, as even though the right wing is gaining ground in virtually every measurable way, this is going to see a resultant and continuous radicalization of the opposition as well, as they reach for yet new tools and more extreme solutions to stem what they view as the rise of an existential threat. And when soft power is no longer enough to attempt to eradicate that threat, which is what they did try to use up until this point, the reason why YouTube implemented all of the safeguards, all of the algorithmic changes, all of the massaging initiatives, was because of the soft power held by our opposition. They advantaged our enemies, and they limited our reach for that precise reason. However, our opposition has burned through their political capital, and at a remarkable, near historically unprecedented rate. The only other occasion that I can possibly think of a political movement burning through its goodwill quicker was literally the terror during the French Revolution. And as there is no more soft power to use, as always, the tyrant turned to more forceful means. And this too will eventually change. The problem is that whilst we have, or at least are in the process currently of turning culture around, politics is of course quite a bit downstream of culture. It will be a good 10 years, if not more, until we begin to see our cultural impact truly start to shape politics at large. And that's assuming we ever get there, with ever more stringent regulations and control placed on the internet, which, make no mistake, is the only reason why we've gotten as far as we have. And again, the government understands this as well, as there is another particularly interesting part of this green paper that explains why this is so very necessary right now. There are, of course, the usual mentions of diversity, diverse audiences, and etc., but this is all in order to shape culture. As they say, our public service media providers are a central pillar of national culture and are key to driving growth in the TV sector, increasing their own prevalence and advantage there. Saying further that public service media watchers are more likely to have a high level of trust in institutions and are less polarized, or in other words, less opposed to the current popular culture. This is the UK government's ham-fisted attempt to try and shape culture, in much the same way that I, and those like me, have done already. See, when myself and everyone else that talking about these cultural issues on YouTube started doing this, none of us viewed it as a matter of shaping culture or changing how things worked. We saw things that didn't appear to be of benefit of anyone, that wasn't good, and we thought, well, why don't we fix this? Surely there must be some better way of doing this instead of ruining all of my fun. But in essence, this is what we did. We changed culture. It became culturally acceptable to point out that there is actually too much diversity in this piece of entertainment. There is too much of a focus on race and politics instead of it being fun. And as we converted more and more people to this point of view, it became less and less popular to do it. We changed public perception of this media. We pointed out the things that the political powers did to influence people. They don't just cast Helen of Troy as a black woman by accident. It is in fact a part of an agenda. Entertainment today doesn't suck because of an accident. It is, in fact, an agenda. And yes, your life does suck more now than it did, and it is, in fact, because of an agenda. And all of this happened entirely naturally. There were no one on our sides with media backing. None of us have 20,000 employees. None of us have £200 million operating budgets. We simply provided an argument from a platform that people could only reach through their own specific and dedicated efforts to interact with us, to watch our content, to support us, and to be here, to watch videos, to hear the arguments, and to support the creators. None of this could possibly have happened unless we were making some sort of sense. Meanwhile, our opposition largely attempted to affect that culture via the mainstream apparatus, via institutions, via news, via television, via taking over shows and beloved entertainment properties, because they assumed, much like the boomers in governmental power, that that was the way to gain influence, because they could not succeed in the open marketplace of ideas. This is merely just a continuation of that same particular agenda, but now upping the ante, applying ever more firm pressure, and demanding, in fact, that they be given an advantageous position on these platforms. Now, will it help? Will it be enough? No. No, it won't. The censorship in and of itself will probably do little. Despite all egregiously enforced efforts to make it so, people who already know that the BBC cannot be trusted will not do so because they are presented the BBC as a source first. That train has long since left the station. However, what this might very well open the door for is significantly more strict and strident measures. They begin now by claiming they simply just need a bit of a leg up, a bit of an advantage. They just have to be given a little bit more access to the audience, and they can convince everyone that they are right. They couldn't. They already had access to the entire audience. They were literally the media. It obviously strains credulity to believe that they will somehow become more persuasive if they are simply given the exact same amount of power and reach back again. Obviously not, meaning that this will only be the first step in order to then remove the competition. It begins by saying, oh, we just want this. We just want to protect kids from social media. And it ends with, we're just going to have to get rid of you via digital ID. And that is why this is so egregious. Not the demanding special treatment part, that is already rife on YouTube from countless people and channels and individuals and personal pet preferences on behalf of the many developers at YouTube or platforms like Twitch, etc., or X as well, which is far from perfect in this regard either. That is merely business as usual. YouTube is already doing it and is showing absolutely no sign of stopping anytime soon. If you have a good in with YouTube, you will do well. You can get rid of monetization problems and issues and reach problems overnight, as we saw with the famous Dankula example, where Ethan Klein makes one phone call and overnight, all of Dankula's monetization problems disappeared. So no, the danger is not the added reach. The BBC will not convince anyone, no matter how many people they reach at this point. The danger comes when they finally realize that even when given every advantage, they still can't convince everyone. And they have to face a question that either their ideas and solutions are simply bad, which would destroy their entire sense of self-worth, or that they just have to push a little harder. I don't think I need to tell you which of those two options they're going to end up picking 100% of the time. And I'm not even telling you this in an effort to try and stop it or anything. There's nothing any of us really can do. This is, first and foremost, just a green paper. It's there to check out what the public feels on this matter. There will be virtually no feedback. YouTube has made posts about this and will mobilize some creators to point out the hypocrisy of YouTube and some to contact the government. The government will ignore them, as always. They will interpret the silence of the general populace as acceptance, and they'll start drafting legislation to put all of this in practice. It will fail once, twice, maybe 3 or 4 times, but every time it fails, the suggestion will be renamed, repackaged, watered down a little bit here and there, and pushed through again and again until eventually it succeeds. This isn't a question of stopping it. There is no stopping the government when it's determined to do something. This is a question of holding it off for long enough until the culture has shifted sufficiently either to demand the end of these programs or to allow it to benefit our side instead. So just beware. The internet is going to get less free very, very soon. In fact, the last few vestiges of freedom on the internet are probably likely to disappear well inside of our lifetime. And all we can really hope for, and I do think we have a very good chance of getting there, by the way, is that we can keep a lid on it for a little bit longer, for a few more years, maybe a decade, until it will be our side in possession of these powers. At which point, I suppose we'll have to have a debate over just how moral it is to abuse them in the exact same way that they were planning to use them against us. Well, I think that'll be a very interesting discussion when it arrives. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for listening, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.